Parliament has finally passed the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill. It was introduced in 2018 and seeks to criminalize all forms of hate crime and hate speech across various platforms, including social media. Now, it has been criticized for having a vague definition of hate speech, but let's bring you this discussion. We're joined this morning by Linda Mdabe, who is with Lawyers for Human Rights. Linda, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on to our program. So 5 years since being introduced, the bill is finally passed. What took it so long? I mean, in my introduction, I talked about that vague definition of hate speech, but why 5 years?
Of course, there was a rigorous and very intense debate around hate speech and the sort of limitations that were there, which of course are not new, given that these limitations also exist in the Constitution. But of course, those who are in the extreme right, who are of the view that there should be very little limitation on hate speech, were concerned that this is a further intrusion on that right. And of course, if that was going to be allowed, it was going to be at the expense of those vulnerable in society, because of certain things that are said in the public discourse. And of course, one needed to strike that balance. And of course, there was going to be disagreements around what is an appropriate thing to do in the final analysis, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there are existing laws insofar as criminalizing hate speech is concerned, Linda Kutle, aren't there? Have they been so ineffective that this bill is needed?
Yes, of course we would know that there has been so much politics around the Equality Act, for instance, PEPUDA, which is the prevention of the promotion of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination. An act that has long been standing, which says something about hate speech as well as harassment. And there has been a number of cases that have come out of that. And I don't want to name names, but prominent people in the political space have been part of those conversations in court, and there are certain views that are coming from different political spectrums, and of course these views are well established in public. Yeah, but it's not a new thing, as you say.
Yeah. Insofar as the ineffectiveness of the existing laws to govern hate speech and hate crimes, would you say that there has been an increase in this type of crime in our country?
Yes, our obsession really as lawyers for human rights, seeing that we have a program on refugees and migrants, we know this. There has been research that has been done to indicate that there is evidence that xenophobia, for instance, is something that is prevalent in our society. And of course, something needed to be done around that. And we've, of course, been advocating for certain political statements not to be made in public because they prejudice the migrant communities as well as the asylum seeker and refugee communities. And so we've been advocating for their right and trying to communicate to society that certain political statements that have been made during elections as well as through everyday political discourse have a certain impact on how society deals with migrants and refugees.
Yeah. At the start of our interview, we talked about, that there'd been quite a lot of criticism, quite a lot of debate on this bill by political parties, for one. In fact, some of them saying that this hate speech bill will now certainly have a chilling effect on freedom of speech. What's your response to that kind of criticism?
Our response on that is that the limitations already exist. The limitations on the freedom of speech are not new, and of course, it is well known that if they're going to if they have an intention, for instance, if speech has within it inherently an intention to be harmful, to incite harm, and to propagate hate, it is not speech that is accepted in law. And of course, it would have to be limited. And so you wouldn't want that right of free speech to be absolute. And of course, there needs to be limitation insofar as you can prove that there's a certain level of prejudice and harm on a certain sector of society, which is everyone knows is vulnerable.
Yeah, there's a long list of characteristics that could be considered a hate crime or hate speech, right?
Yes.
The list is here in front of me. It's race, gender, sex, which includes intersex, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, religion, belief, culture, language, birth, disability, HIV status, nationality, gender identity, albinism, and occupation as well. So it is quite a long list. And outside of that long list, Linda Kuhle, there's also a lot of clarity around the channels through which these crimes can be committed. And so we're now covered insofar as social media is concerned and online communications as well.
Yes, social media has been a space where people have been able to share information which has the tendency to create any of these two offenses, sort of, be it hate crime or hate speech. But what is exciting, what I think is the greatest achievement in the act itself, is that at least for the first time, one thing which matters to us, xenophobia, and how it manifests itself through different mediums, is something that we now have a remedy for, that our client community can now effectively call for institutions that have an obligation in terms of this act to prosecute. And this is going to be important for us, at least in 2024, going into the year 2024, and given that we're going to have elections next year. I don't have to reiterate someone who appeared in this platform saying certain things about migrants in this country. Of course, they will have to now navigate what I think is an important line which is drawn in this legislation to make sure that they don't get into a trap of inciting and propagating hatred against a certain vulnerable group in society.
You're obviously talking about Action SA leader Herman Mashaba and statements he's made on various platforms, including social media as well. So the impact on, you mentioned the impact on the elections for 2024. What are you thinking of specifically when you say that?
But we know that certain political parties have been using the issue of migrants as some sort of political tool to make some sort of message in society. And of course, we know certain myths have been dispelled in society. Those are the refugees and migrants are often blamed for a number of social ills in society, and most of the time this is without evidence. At least now, this legislation is going to provide remedies for them. It is going to provide some sort of concrete remedies that they can use to hold accountable those who have been propagating hate and prejudice and harm to them.
So, Linda
so
Kutle,
it's not going to be without consequence.
Yeah. So in terms of what happens now, so the bill has been passed. What happens now so that it's signed into law? So if the president assents to the bill, then it becomes effective immediately. And so it will just have to be implemented. And of course, we know that at the level of implementation, what is required is for there to be offences and for the NPA to prosecute those offences. Linda Kutle, Ndabe, let me thank you for your time this morning. He's with Lawyers for Human Rights. As we continue to track this story that's been 5 years in the making, the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill finally being passed by Parliament.